Nobody tells you this part. They tell you to be strong, to push through, to grind. Every motivational account, every fitness page, every no days off mindset, it all says the same thing. Strength is the goal. Weakness is the enemy. Get rid of it as fast as you can. But what if that's exactly backwards? What if your weakness isn't the obstacle between you and God's power? What if it's the door? Let's start with Paul, because most people know the line. When I am weak, then I am strong. We put it on coffee mugs. We say it when things get hard, but here's what almost nobody teaches. The Greek word Paul uses for when is hotan. And hotan doesn't describe a single moment. It describes a permanent state. Paul wasn't saying, on my hard days, God shows up. He was describing a lifestyle. Weakness is the permanent address where strength lives. Not a phase to push through, a posture to live from. And then there's the thorn. Paul begged God 3 times to remove it. 3 times. This wasn't a quiet prayer. This was desperate pleading from a man who had been shipwrecked, beaten, imprisoned, and stoned, and left for dead. And God said no. Not because he wasn't listening, but because the thorn was intentional. Scholars believe Paul may have suffered from epilepsy, painful, recurrent, and in the ancient world considered demonic. When people saw an epileptic, they would literally spit to ward off evil spirits. In Galatians 4:14, Paul tells the Galatians, they did not spit at me. And in the original Greek, that's exactly what the word means. The man who spread the gospel across the entire ancient world may have been someone in which the crowds physically recoiled from. But God chose him anyway, on purpose, because when God's power shows up in a body like that, nobody can explain it away. Paul even describes what that feels like, God's power resting on him. But the Greek word for rest there is episkenu, a tent being pitched. It's not a gentle warmth. It's God setting up camp, moving in, making your weakness his dwelling place. The weakness doesn't get replaced. It becomes the location. Now, I want to tell you about a man most Catholics have never heard of. His name was Hermann. And he was born in 1013 in Germany with cerebral palsy, a cleft palate, and spina bifida. He could barely speak. He could barely move. He was described by historians as, and I want you to hear this, not simply a cripple, but practically helpless. His parents, unable to care for him, brought him to a Benedictine monastery at age 7 and left him there. The world had already written him off. But inside that monastery, something happened. Hermann learned Latin, then Greek, then Arabic. He wrote treatises on theology, mathematics, and astronomy. He built musical instruments and astronomical tools. And then, when he began going blind later in life, when his body failed him even further, he started writing hymns. He wrote the Salve Regina. He wrote the Veni Sancte Spiritus. He wrote the Alma Redemptoris Mater. 3 of the most prayed prayers in all of Catholic history, prayers that have been spoken by billions of people across 1,000 years, came from a man who could hardly speak, a man who couldn't walk, a man the world counted as nothing. The people who lived with him, who carried him and fed him every day, called him something. They called him the wonder of his age. Not in spite of his body, because of what God did through it. Let that rewire something in you, because here's what this means for you practically today. You have a weakness. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's a limitation you've been carrying for years, something you've begged God to take away, something you're ashamed of or exhausted by, and you've been treating it like a problem to solve before your real life can begin. But Paul's thorn was permanent. Hermann's body never healed. And God didn't wait for either of them to be fixed before he moved through them. He moved through the weakness itself. He pitched his tent there. He called it home. Your weakness is not the waiting room. It's not the thing you have to get past. It is the point. It is where God does what only God can do. Because when something impossible comes from something broken, no one can take the credit. So stop asking only to be fixed. Start asking what he wants to build through this. Because the prayer you'll one day send out into the world, the one that helps someone you'll never meet, might be the thing that came out of the hardest, most limited, most broken season of your life. Herman couldn't walk. He could barely speak. And 1,000 years later, you probably know his words by heart. That's not an accident. That's the point.